My name is Rochelle Marcus. I had the pleasure of being on the board of Florida's Voice on Developmental Disabilities with its founder, Arlene Lakin, and many individuals like Martin Rosenblum, Howard Usher, Jill Ginsburg, and Elise November. We later worked with Dorian Lang and Terry Sherman on the Education Committee at Ann Storck to make this event today possible, along with the Broward County Bar Association, the Children's Service Council, and Tobias Financial Advisors. FVDD merged into Ann Storck to continue to provide educational seminars serving our community with disabilities. Maya Angelou said, "You will face many defeats in life, but never let yourself be defeated." We are here today as a community that will support and succeed. We are here as a community that presumes competence and shares information to enable success. I arrived at this moment when my husband, David, and I were having dinner with our daughter, Nicole, and her fiance, Chris Devon. We were discussing an upcoming inaugural educational seminar in memory of Arlene Lakin at Ann Storck and contemplating possible keynote speakers. Chris mentioned that Linsey Davis, the news anchor we had recently watched during the Democratic debates, was a family friend. Her dad had built one of their homes. He offered to reach out to have his dad call her dad. And that is how the inaugural Arlene Lakin Educational Seminar at Ann Storck came to have our illustrious keynote speaker, Linsey Davis. Linsey Davis is currently an anchor for Weekend World News Tonight on Sundays and ABC News Live Prime, ABC's first ever streaming evening newscast. Ms. Davis is a reporter filing reports for Good Morning America and Nightline. She has covered a wide range of stories, including the Boston Massacre bombing, the Nairobi Mall Massacre, the Haiti earthquake, the Miracle on the Hudson, the Casey Anthony trial, and presidential elections. Ms. Davis has received several honors for her reporting, including 2 Emmy Awards and a regional Edward R. Murrow Award. The Center for Leadership Development awarded her with the distinction of Up and Coming. Ms. Davis earned her undergraduate degree in psychology from the University of Virginia and a Master's of Art degree in communications from New York University. She is a member of the National Association of Black Journalists. Ms. Davis is a woman of faith, a wife to Paul Roberts, a mother to Aiden, and a best-selling children's book author of Stay This Way Forever, The World is Awake, and One Big Heart. She is a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, Inc. Today, she will introduce us to her relative, Malcolm. Please join me as we welcome Linsey Davis. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Linsey Davis. I'm from ABC News and a children's book author, and I'm just delighted to be able to join you all today virtually, but with you certainly in spirit, and just honored to have been selected to be a part of this event for the Ann Storck Center. You know, I admire this organization for so much of what it does, you know, for the community and what you all represent, discovering ability and building independence so that people can live happier and more fulfilled lives. And with that in mind, I'd like to start in a rather unusual way by introducing you to a relative of mine named Malcolm.
Hey, this is Malcolm Phillips, and praise is what I do. On Malcolm's Praise Live 365.com/833199. I am a published author, and my latest book is entitled A Dream Deferred Makes Me Wanna Holler. It is a great read for these times that we are living in now. I break down Langston Hughes' poem, A Dream Deferred with Scripture. Also, I write about vision, do you know your gift, and more.
Malcolm is 31 years old, and he has cerebral palsy. He cannot control his muscles the way most of us do. While his body does not function like the average man, though, his spirit and his determination are unmatched. He doesn't allow his diagnosis to dictate what he's able to accomplish, because as Henry Ford once said, whether you believe you can or can't do something, you're right. Malcolm has written 2 books, and he owns his own religious radio station called Malcolm's Praise Live 365. I admire Malcolm for too many reasons for me to list out to you today, but I will say that I find myself in awe of his indomitable spirit, his ability to dream and to pursue and to persevere against so many odds. He could easily allow his condition to be an obstacle, an excuse to not achieve or excel. And I think that many of us would accept that and understand it. When I looked up palsy, it's defined as a medical term which refers to various types of paralysis, which when I think of the word paralysis, I think of limited movement, the loss of the ability to move. But when I think of Malcolm, I see something that's so to the contrary. He uses what he can control to propel him forward. And very specifically, he uses his knee. Most of us probably don't really think about our knees until they start giving us some kind of problem or causing us pain. But his knee, specifically his left knee, allows him to control his computer and to write. He's able to communicate with people through a Dynavox VMAX, which essentially gives voice to his words. I think about so many of us who have fully functioning bodies, and yet we're so limited by our thoughts, by our doubts, by our lack of will or belief or drive, you name it. You know, there's so many outward and inward deterrents that can keep us all paralyzed. His first book is entitled A Dream Deferred Makes Me Want to Holler. And he also hosts, as I said, a religious radio station. But again, he does not allow his diagnosis to define him, to limit him, to put any kinds of parameters around him. You know, just to give you one example, and there are many emails that I've gotten from him with various requests and talking about his interests and his plans. But about a year ago, he reached out to me with a full PowerPoint presentation that he created in order to educate the public about the need to create accessible airplanes to facilitate air travel for wheelchair-bound travelers. He created a solution that includes the ability to lock the wheelchairs in place on planes. And it was a really clever and great idea, and it's one that he came up with, that he created, and that he continues to try to implement. You know, it's been said before that there are 3 types of people in life. There are people who make things happen, who watch things happen, and who wonder what happened. And Malcolm is continuing to make it happen through it all. He says that his favorite Bible verse is 1 Chronicles 4:10. Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me and keep me from harm so that I will be free from pain. And Malcolm says that God has granted him this request. And I consider myself blessed to really just be a witness to it all, and to the strength, endurance, and perseverance of his doting mother, who makes sure he has what he needs and that no one counts him out. Like I know so many of you, so many of the parents who are listening right now, and in this moment, you just know all too well the tireless hours and sleepless nights to make sure that your child gets the opportunity to live to their greatest potential. So at the end of Malcolm's website, in the contact me section, he writes, to request me for book signings, speaking engagements, or if you have questions, just email or text me. And I love that. It just makes my heart smile that he anticipates book signings and speaking engagements, and they no doubt will happen. Malcolm wrote his first book well before I had ever written mine, and he let me know all his marketing plans and how he was going to roll it out. And whenever he would run into some kind of obstacle, he would text me back a few hours later and say, well, don't worry, I found a YouTube video about it. I'll learn how to do it in a few hours tonight. So again, I'm just inspired by him. And shortly after he released his first book, I released mine. And I had been thinking about writing a book for several years, but I just wasn't quite sure exactly what I wanted to write about. When my son was an infant and we'd be reading books to him, I'd be thinking, boy, you know, I could really do this. And over time, I said, I should do this. I need to do this. Many people will say that, you know, the news industry is so different from writing children's books. And, you know, on the face, that's true. but really at the heart of me, at my center, I consider myself to be a storyteller. And so I found myself very interested in books that we were choosing for my son. And we really wanted to give him some good messages, some uplifting messages that could instill and inspire, great values. And then at the same time, raising a Black son, I felt like, wow, I'm having to really be so intentional and so deliberate to find books with characters who look like my son. And then I put my reporter hat on and did some studying and some research, and I found that more than 90% of the protagonists in children's books are white. Meantime, I was kind of scratching my head because if you look it up any, U.S. Census Bureau statistics, you'll find that more than half of the children in this country are children of color. And, there was also a study in 2018 by the University of Wisconsin, and they found that 27% of children's books have animals as the main characters. And so that means that children are more likely to see animals than they are people of color, than they are children who look like them. And a few years ago, when I first had the idea of writing children's books, I read an essay and it was called Mirrors, Windows, and Sliding Glass Doors. And that really had a profound impact on me because the idea was that every children's book needs to have a mirror so that children can see themselves reflected in the pages of the books. They need to have windows so they can perhaps peer into a world that's unfamiliar than their own. And if those sliding glass doors are really to be effective, you can transport the child basically into this new world. And what that essay was talking about didn't seem to be a regular occurrence in the children's books that I was finding. There seemed to be this disconnect, if you will. So rather than complain about the problem, I just figured, let me try to be part of the solution and write my own books. Really, initially, it was just going to be one book. And I ended up having some success with the first book. So then I decided to write another one and another one. And so now I've written 3 books. And I have another one that's coming out next year. And so this has really become, part of my whole repertoire is children's books, and something that has inspired me to be a part of making change. And it's interesting because I didn't really set out to have this big imprint or impact, but it slowly started happening, just being born out of this conviction of wanting to see more diversity in children's books. And so I do really feel proud to be a part of this change now. And I also feel that my son has been able to watch me start this new career path, really right in the midst of my regular day job. And I've added, this other hat to the others that I wear. And I love it in particular when my son, sometimes he'll grab a whole bunch of papers and he'll staple the papers and then start drawing pictures and then, write a sentence about each picture. And he'll say, look, mommy, I write books just like you. And I love that he sees what's possible right now, that if you just decide that you want to do something, you can. And I like the idea that there is this freedom that he has and that he has experienced being able to witness this process firsthand, because that was actually another reason why I was interested in writing the books, because he wanted to be able to see mommy at work. And with regard to the news, I always felt like the topics that we cover are just so heavy and intense sometimes for a young mind, a young impressionable mind. And so with the books, it's something that I can really share with him 100% and not be concerned that it might be harmful to him. And the other aspect of this is that I think about is my son has also inspired the topics of each of my books. He has not only inspired me to write the books, but then he really unwittingly would give me the ideas for what I would write about. The first book, he was very young, just a few years old. We were in the car. And he asked me pretty much out of nowhere, Mommy, does God open up the flowers? And I felt that I really needed to try to answer that question for him in a meaningful way and in a book form, really, it's something that would establish, look at God and his creations all around us and his wonder, which includes us. And so my first book, The World is Awake, A Celebration of Everyday Blessings, was really my attempt to answer that question for him and give all children a gentle introduction to who God is. And similarly, my second book was inspired by him asking, why did the police take those 2 Black men to jail? He was so young, and I couldn't believe that he was asking that. And I really had thought that he was distracted with his Legos when this news segment came on. And it just felt like such a heavy question, right? He was reacting to the 2 men who were arrested at the Starbucks in Philadelphia a few years back. And I really started thinking about just how divided we are as a society. And even if I turn the TV off and the news off, that my son was still going to kind of get certain messaging from school or from his friends. And so I felt like, you know what, let me just address this head on. There was an educator that we had on our show one time, and they said, if they're old enough to ask the question, they're old enough to hear the answer. So I decided to write a book basically saying, yes, we're different. Yes, we have different skin colors, and we have different features, and we have different religions and different beliefs and likes and dislikes. And yet God gave us all this one big heart. And that's the most important part, because that's where the love starts. And I felt like God really had put this on my heart. And I wanted to get these messages out there for children, for young people, because, you know, one assumption that's often repeated that people will say is that kids don't see color. I totally disagree with that premise. Kids do see color. They just don't assign a value to it. It's adults who do that. Children are quite the opposite. You know, when my son comes home from making a new friend, he never mentions to me their race or their religion. He tells me about all they have in common. He says, you know what, they like Legos and they like Star Wars just like me. So I think that many of us would be better off if we were able to get back to that kind of mentality. And so for me, it all boils down to the topic of my second book, which is called One Big Heart, a celebration of being more alike than different. If you look at the Human Genome Project, for example, it explains that premise through science, that we share 99.9% of the same DNA. It's just that 0.1% that makes us different. And somehow many of us end up spending 100% of our lives focused on that 0.1% difference. And I know for many people, what did or didn't happen in the DNA of their child or loved one has manifested itself in a mountainous way that at times may seem too big to bear. And I know it's not easy to hear people give, you know, their buck up little camper sayings and speeches when words sometimes just feel so empty. I know that with my own biggest tribulations, I've turned to my faith. I've prayed and moved my feet, as they say, anticipating that God would get me through it again, as he has always done in the past. So I hope that each of you has something or someone or some things that you can turn to in your most frustrated or desperate times. And I also like to write and run to help with my own healing and headspace, because, you know, I get it. It's not always easy, especially when you feel like you have to go it alone. And that's where community comes in. That's where, you know, the Storck Center comes in. That's where the village comes in. And at the heart of it, because again, that's the name of my second book, One Big Heart, the most important part is love. And that's the theme of all three of my books. The first one is essentially know that you are loved by God. The second one is basically love each other. And the last one is know that you are loved. You know, Stay This Way Forever is my latest book. And I think that most parents are going to really relate to it, that the words will resonate. I want kids to come away knowing that you are loved and you are adored and you are cherished. And I feel like any parent who's ever wanted to kind of push the pause button and just savor and freeze these certain different aspects of childhood, this playground that is childhood, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about in the pages of the books. You know, most of the time, I'm just trying to memorize these moments before they slip away. And then there are also those aspects of childhood that I hope that my son will grow up and take with him into adulthood, his curiosity and his creativity and his joy. You know, there are so many nights where he'll say, you know, he'll all of his plans for the next day, and he'll exclaim, it's going to be the best day ever. And I really hope that he holds on to that and continues to be excited about tomorrow and the possibility of the future. You know, on another personal note, at the time when I started writing children's books a few years back, I actually had felt that maybe I had hit a ceiling at work with my regular day job reporting, and I felt like perhaps my growth was being stunted a little bit. But instead of just wallowing in that, I still had all this creativity to get out there. And so then I was able to grow in this other direction. And looking back on that, you know, I didn't know what I was creating and cultivating at the time, but I feel so blessed now that I have this space in my life and in my career that I could create this on my own and really take charge and be in control of this one particular aspect of my life. And it felt like I had some power, and that there was some way I was able to reclaim me and my possibilities, and that, you know, I wouldn't be defined or limited in a space that I really couldn't, you know, take charge of. And I didn't realize the magnitude of it at the time, but just looking back, I'm glad for the dead ends in life sometimes. They're not fun at the time when you're feeling stuck and you're just there in that corner. But in retrospect, you know, when you're running through the maze and you hit that wall and you have to kind of backtrack to find your way and recreate or reinvent yourself, to find your way back to freedom, you know, it has a way of stretching you and making you better. And another interesting aspect of all this was the timing. This past summer, the protests and the so-called racial reckoning that we're going through here, you know, it has so many parents thinking about their own children, about raising upstanding, loving citizens. And based on online data, there was a 2,022% increase in the past year of parents doing searches online, trying to figure out, you know, how to raise a more empathetic child when it comes to embracing diversity. So while my initial focus, just going back to that initial essay that I read, Mirrors, Windows, and Sliding Glass Doors, initially I was really focused on providing my son with mirrors in all of the books, you know? And while that's still important, I've now kind of shifted to also be just as mindful of the presence of windows, right? Because there have been so many parents who in the midst of all this have been saying, you know, what can I do? What kind of conversations can I have? What can I, you know, how can I open up my child's awareness? And I think that a window in books, like especially if you live in an area that's not particularly diverse, and you know maybe your child doesn't have a diverse family or neighborhood or school or place of worship, I think that one easy place you can start is by providing diverse toys and books. And I started seeing this need, fortunately, well before the death of George Floyd, to provide books that serve as windows. And you know, it's not just about race, I would say, when we're talking about, you know, exposing our kids to diversity, though that's often what, you know, the catchphrase kind of means these days. I think that that's how people interpret it anyway. But in my book, One Big Heart, I have a character named Amanda who's doing one-armed cartwheels because she only has one arm. And that was born out of a real life scenario. A colleague of mine who has a daughter who's roughly the same age as my son. And when we meet up and we'll kind of catch up with, you know, our stories on what our child is up to. And he said, yeah, so my daughter was telling me, hey, Dad, did you know that God makes some people who just have one arm? And so he said that, you know, he kind of encouraged his daughter, oh, well, where did you learn that? And she went on to tell him about a little girl that she was playing with at school and how she only has one arm. And she asked the little girl what happened. And the little girl told her, God made me that way. And he said that, you know, they just kept right on playing. And that the daughter was like, oh, okay, you know, kind of shrugged her shoulders like, oh, okay, makes sense. And so I think that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it has to be inclusive of all of us, you know, bring everyone into the tent together, anyone who's ever felt isolated, forgotten, or marginalized. We're not here to play the oppression Olympics, you know, to try to compete for who's had it the worst, who carries the biggest burden. But we, as Dorian so eloquently put in her email to me, we embrace the commonality of humanity, facing each new dawn of challenges with hope, compassion, gratitude, and love, relentless optimism and faith, whatever that looks like for each of us. The whole world needs more of that. And I agree, Dorian. You know, I think that when people typically hear diversity and inclusion, that might include beyond race to religion or maybe even sexuality. But I think in terms of all people who are uniquely abled with different experiences and perspectives, we need more people at the table from all walks of life because, you know, sometimes those at the table don't even know what they don't know. And so it just makes us all better to include everyone. It's been said, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. And, you know, Shirley Chisholm, she put it this way: if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And those were not just her words, those were her actions. As the first Black woman elected to the United States Congress, who later in 1972 went on to run for president. That was the first time that a Black person had done that on a major party ticket. And I love pioneers and trailblazers who see a need and roll up their sleeves and try to do something about it. People like Ann Storck, who retired to South Florida from Connecticut and opened up not just her heart, but also her home to a handful of disregarded children with developmental disabilities. 4 years later, she opened up the Pediatric Care Center to serve 55 children. And today the center accommodates 96 permanent adult residents and serves more than 250 clients daily across 2 different campuses. Meaningful work, impactful work, work that changes lives and attitudes. And I certainly don't have all the answers. I'll pass along 2 pieces of advice that have helped me along the way, one career-wise and the other both professionally and personally, I would say. The first is, if you ask for help, you'll often get advice. If you ask for advice, you'll often get help. I found that to be so true. The other is, do what you can and let God do the rest. And lastly, I'll leave you with my favorite scripture, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a future and a hope. And so with that, I thank you so much for your time, for your listening ears. God bless you, Godspeed, and good night.